Well, thank you all for joining us for TOKY Office Hours, September 2025 edition. Well, maybe we'll go with edition. We are really excited to have our guest, Nivin Lee, who I'm going to introduce here in just a second. He's going to present on the new SEO for AEC, and there'll be opportunity for plenty of time for questions at the end. I am going to ask that if you can, if you're asking questions, maybe activate your video just so we can have you on screen. But of course, if that's a challenge for you, I would rather that you asked the question than worried about that. So, with that said, really excited to have Nivin Lee with us. Nivin is the Vice President of Strategy for Voltage. Voltage is a digital marketing agency based out of Kansas City, but I'm going to let Nivin really tell you more about the agency and his background. And Nivin, when you're ready to have your presentation on screen, just let me know.
Oh yeah, let's go for it.
All right.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Jerry. Welcome everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join today. Today we're mainly going to be talking about the new reality of search engine optimization, specifically in architecture, engineering, and construction industries. You might have heard a lot about how SEO is changing. It's already challenging in a lot of professional services verticals, but with the rise of things like generative search and AI-driven assistance, it's definitely rewriting the rules on how we do SEO. So this session is going to be about equipping you with a clear understanding of what's changing, why all of it matters, and some information on what to do about it so that you can decide how much you want to invest in and spend time on SEO for the firm that you work in. By the end, you should have a practical understanding of the tactics to help your firm stay visible and trusted, even when people search in different ways by using AI and LLMs, which is radically different from what we've known in the past 20 years doing this. So yeah, like Jerry mentioned, my name is Nivin. I'm the vice president of strategy at Voltage. My team works with professional services firms that have long buying cycles and higher ticket deals or clients. The thing that makes us very different is that we don't just think about SEO in the old sense, which is usually relegated to keywords and rankings and clicks, but in the context of generative AI. Tools like ChatGPT, Perplexity, and even Google AI's search mode and AI overviews are just reshaping the way that we think about search results and also reshaping buyer expectations. So we've spent quite a bit of time researching, testing, and honestly, sometimes fighting against how these AI systems use our content and the content of our clients. That's where a lot of today's perspective comes from. It comes from real world experiments with firms like yours, both in the AEC industry and other professional services industries. So that's where you get a lot of our research, our testing, and frankly, a lot of our failures throughout the process. So I always love a good metaphor. And for today, I want to picture SEO as fishing because that's one of my favorite hobbies. The lake is our environment, the market, and the search landscape that we work in. The waves are the big forces of change, like AI reshaping how people discover firms like ours. And the lures are our content, designed to attract the right fish. We also use hooks. That would be technical SEO to make sure that we capture those people in a safe and ethical way, and making sure that what we attract doesn't slip away from us. And finally, the catch is local SEO, building the trust and credibility that actually gets us chosen. You'll have heard me mention technical content and local SEO. Those aren't new to SEO by any means. They're usually the three major pillars in which people usually think about SEO. But we'll discuss how generative search has added some nuance to those three layers throughout this presentation. So as we go, I'll keep coming back to this metaphor because honestly, it makes sense for an otherwise overwhelming topic. So just as a quick agenda to get you understood on where we're going to take this, here's a roadmap for the next 30-ish minutes. Like I mentioned, the lake is the current environment and what that looks like for us as marketers, as well as for our buyers, because we both experience changes and we both experience those waves, which is how AI is shaking everything up. And we'll get into some of the causes and effects and what those usually look like from the buyer's perspective. We'll talk about lures, which is adapting our content strategy. which is probably where you get most of the changes related to generative search. We'll talk about the hooks, which is the technical foundation we need mostly in our website and digital properties. And then lastly, the catch, which is all about local SEO and trust building and reputation management. This way, we'll move from big picture context all the way down to some hands on tactics. So let's start with the lake. This is about the new reality we're all living in and experienced, whether that is in our work lives or in our personal lives. Over the last couple of years, both firms and customers have seen some massive shifts, and some of them are more important than others. We'll talk about the more important ones. For firms, it's tighter resources and leadership skepticism. And for buyers, it's entirely new tools shaping how they research and choose firms like ours. The result is a completely different environment for marketers like us that we definitely need to adapt to. But first, we'll start with what we experience as digital marketers in the space. The lake feels smaller and definitely more difficult to fish in. Hopefully, you can resonate with this statement and maybe empathize a little bit, because I certainly experienced it with both our firm and our clients. Marketing teams are leaner, budgets are tighter, and instead of leading strategy, marketers often end up in a reactive cycle supporting sales, whether that's working on proposals, business development support, or quick turn requests. That leaves us little time for innovation, content creation, or proving ROI. So when we think about SEO, it's often squeezed into whatever hours are left over rather than treated as a true growth driver. Studies confirm this. AEC firms spend about 35% less on marketing than most other industries. A lot of industries will spend on average 7.7% of their operating profit on marketing to reinvest for the next dollar in operating profit. But AEC firms usually spend somewhere between 1 and 5%. That's not holistically bad. It really depends on how your business is structured and how many leads that you need, how many opportunities you need to run the business. But it does indicate a trend line in how AEC firms think about marketing investments and what that says about where we spend our time and our dollars. This shows up in a few key ways. One, teams of are fewer. They're usually around 10 people or less, even at some of the larger AEC firms. Leaders are pushing for more metrics that they can measure in months and not years, which indicates sort of a short-term thinking in a lot of ways, just sort of getting through the year rather than 5-year planning. And there's very little time spent on long-term brand strategy or content production compared to a lot of other industries that we work in. So if you felt like you're always in a scramble, you're not imagining it. It's an industry-wide issue that a lot of your peers are facing as well. On top of that, another major hurdle is leadership support. So if you are a leader in this call, this is more addressed towards maybe some of your direct reports. Surveys show that a third of firms, specifically in the AEC industry, lack leadership buy-in, and that's proving to be a significant barrier in marketing investments. Whether that is marketing investments that are focused on internal in-house marketing work, or maybe that's working with an agency or some other vendor partner. This isn't just about budgets, though, it's also about perception. Many leaders don't view marketing as a growth engine in the same way that marketers do. They see it as a support function, making brochures or proposals. That mindset does make it a bit harder to justify investments in SEO, even though visibility and credibility are critical for winning work today. You'll see throughout this presentation the different opportunities and ways in which our buyers might be using generative search and AI tools to vet the company, to vet the firm, vet the brand, in a lot of different ways, even when they get deep into the sales cycle and the marketing team is removed from a particular opportunity. Let's also talk about what it looks like for the buyer. Speaking of, the way that they search and the way that they buy has fundamentally changed. So instead of scrolling through search results, or what we call them search engine results pages or SERPs, they're using AI assistants and AI driven search engines far more than they did whenever tools like ChatGPT released back in 2022. That means decisions are being influenced earlier in the journey by AI curated insights, things like summaries, case study highlights, and reviews. That level of summarization and that level of personalized response definitely changes the game in how our buyers look at our firms, look at our proposals, assess our credibility, and build a level of trust with us beyond just the brand. So if we're not showing up in those key moments, we might not even get considered, which is a big problem, of course. This shift isn't theoretical. It's something that's happening right now and one that we can measure. According to some studies that are both across the board in professional services firms, as well as some specific to AEC, around 90% of procurement leaders are either using or planning to use AI agents this year for supplier discovery. And around 72% of business buyers are already using AI features like Google AI overviews, which no doubt you've probably seen in some of your searching in both your personal and professional life. And 90% of them are expected to click some of those citations that Google puts in those AI overviews or in AI mode. So even if your phone isn't using AI tools, both for your productivity as well as in a marketing context, your clients definitely are. And they're making decisions based on what those tools surface. And the fact that we don't have complete control over what they surface is all the more reason why we dig into how it works and what we can do to build a positive reputation and positive influence in whatever large language models show to our users, even when they're searching for us on demand without us knowing about it. Let's move on to talking about some of those waves. Now that we kind of establish what that new reality sounds like, let's actually see what it looks like. The big shifts that are changing the waters that we're fishing in are forces that reshape how search works and how buyers behave. It's complicated, but understanding those waves is definitely key to adapting to it. I want to start by taking a quick timeline view of how generative search has really affected SEO, or just search engines in general. So here's a quick look at that timeline. In mid 2023 is when we saw a lot of the changes that were more consumer facing. Technically, LLMs have been a part of the wide internet for some time. Like I mentioned, ChatGPT technically launched, I think, November of 2022, but it's earlier than most people think about it. But Google started testing its generative search experience in mid 2023. By late 2023, it had rolled out globally. And in 2024, it became AI overviews, which led to both innovation and also chaos, including misinformation problems, is the major issue that came up with AI overviews. But by 2025, AI mode was introduced, essentially embedding generative search and that large language model feel that you would get from ChatGPT, from Perplexity, into Google search. Google also has its own separate product called Gemini, which uses the same training model that you might see in AI mode. The pace of change here is pretty staggering. What used to shift slowly over years is now changing in months. And Google and other search engines are definitely responding to the criticism that they got. So, for example, AI overviews, which was notorious for sharing misinformation, is what we'll call it, but maybe on a technical term, just bad information. They tried to address those changes pretty quickly, which is kind of what 2024 was dedicated to. And I imagine that they didn't have those issues, you might have seen AI mode come out a lot earlier. So now let's dig into some of the real effects that we can see from the rise of generative search in search engine results pages. One of the most noticeable effects is what we call zero click searches. A zero click search is whenever someone clocks an organic listing in Google search, but doesn't actually click through to a citation. That means that the answer was provided probably more directly in search results, in AI mode or in an AI overview without the need to actually visit a website. For marketers, that definitely means less traffic, even if you might see impressions go up. On that note, obviously, the resulting effect is that website traffic goes down. This is what some call the crocodile effect in our industry, if you're in SEO. Impressions go up because AI is surfacing most of our content, but clicks go down because users are satisfied with whatever they get in the search window and don't feel the need to do any sort of additional fact checking or additional research because people are mostly looking for quick answers to basic questions. So our report looks strange whenever we look in things like Search Console or Google Analytics or any other sort of search engine focused tool. More visibility, but fewer visits. That's confusing for a lot of stakeholders, which can sort of affect that leadership buy-in because now all of a sudden there's not easy data or easy visualization. And that definitely makes it hard to prove the value of SEO in some of the old traditional ways that we used to. What's funny is OpenAI actually released, I think it was a 63-page report on how their consumers are using ChatGPT. I promise I will read it so that you don't have to, because it is a long one and it's written like an academic paper with a full methodology and all the bells and whistles. But the big point coming out of that that professional services need to understand is that there is a steady growth curve in how people in their work lives use generative search and ChatGPT for things like finding new suppliers, for things like understanding if they're credible or if there are any red flags that they should stay away from. They're even using ChatGPT to understand how to buy. So now all of a sudden, entry level procurement managers might consider themselves an expert because now they can use ChatGPT to throw in a proposal and see what comes back. So there's a lot of different ways in which those LLMs affect not just how people find us and how people hear about us, but how they buy at a very intrinsic bottom of funnel way, which produces some challenges. Another issue is measurement. So AI tools don't share a lot of data about what users are searching for or what they're clicking. This makes it harder to know which optimizations are actually working, which ones matter more than others, or if it's working at all. Marketers everywhere are asking, should we still care about clicks? How do we measure visibility in AI features? How much traffic are we losing to ChatGPT? These are real questions without clear answers. To give you a bit more of a technical understanding of this, ChatGPT, AI mode, AI overviews, they don't currently say, hey, here's what your target audience is actually prompting our engines for. Here's how often we showed you or your brand or a link to your website in our responses. The only information that we really get with some level of confidence is understanding when people click through on those citations to a website. And really, they only do that through a single UTM parameter. So it's not super spiffy yet. I imagine that as LLMs start to monetize their engines a bit more, they will have to give advertisers a bit more information on how people use their engines to view brands like ours. But that day has not arrived yet. That could change tomorrow, but at least right now, there is not a lot of data that we get from LLMs and generative search features that can help us prove our efforts, which makes this doubly more difficult. AI also isn't perfect. So just as it makes up facts about trivial things like pizza toppings, if you remember AI reviews, one of the big social media level viral pieces of bad information it gave was to use Elmer's glue as a fantastic replacement for cheese if you were vegan. It can misrepresent firms and services if it misrepresents what to put on a pizza. We've already seen examples of companies suing Google because AI generated summaries spread damaging false information about them in some cases. This is a risk that AEC firms need to be aware of. Your reputation could be shaped by an AI system that you don't control. So, as you think about branding, especially if you're here for the last TOKY Office Hours, building your brand truth in a way that not only builds a positive reputation, but outlines your differentiation and builds healthy, controlled associations is going to be incredibly important as you leverage your authority in your space and leverage your differentiation in your space. And how AI systems will digest that content and then give it back to users. It doesn't stop there. We're seeing lawsuits and antitrust concerns across the board, whether that's firms suing Google, Google suing firms, whatever it is, over things like market dominance and content usage. Meanwhile, public sentiment towards Google is kind of souring because of all of it. All of this creates instability, right? Spam is everywhere. People are debating whether SEO is dead again, and marketers are left wondering if their careers are at risk. So it's a chaotic time. But out of that chaos, new strategies are definitely emerging, which is what Voltage as an SEO agency is primarily doing with our spare time. So if you felt panicked or confused or like you're constantly reacting instead of planning, you're not alone. Out in the wild, we're seeing a few predictable things. People racing to rename and rebrand SEO, which if you haven't seen that, it's littered all over LinkedIn. Best practice lists based on thin early data and loud SEO is dead concerns. On top of that, impressions can go up while clicks and measurable traffic fall, which scares everybody, including us at times, even though we have a decent level of expertise on what's happening behind the scenes. So it just feels like a level of chaos. So, how do we adapt? The good news is that the fundamentals of SEO haven't disappeared. If your firm was already deep into what we call traditional SEO, then none of the work that you've done has become obsolete. It's not bad. We didn't relabel all the best practices overnight. Instead, they just raised it to a higher standard. So now there's just some added best practices and some added nuance to the things that we were already doing, which is what we're going to spend the rest of our time digging into. So if you are doing SEO, you're probably familiar with the three main pillars of SEO. If you're not, we'll talk about them now, which is content SEO, which I describe as our lures, technical SEO, which is our hooks, and local SEO, our catch. So let's dig into each. First, let's start with content SEO or our lures. Content SEO is about creating and structuring web content so it answers client questions in a way that both humans and AI models can understand. Emphasis on both humans and AI models. In the old days of SEO, a lot of people would try to gamify the system or cheat the system by creating content that was mainly focused on SEO and sort of making search engines see them more. That's gone out the window. Not only in sort of AI generated search, but some of the old search methods too, where you now should focus on humans even more than search engines, and all the good results will follow. If AI is curating a short list of results and data and content for our users, our content has to be good enough to make it into that conversation based on our authority, based on a differentiation, based on our associations, as well as the quality of the content itself. We've done this quite a bit for a lot of our clients, but a good example is one of our clients, Analytics 8, which is a full service data consultancy up in Chicago. We've improved their content SEO with this approach, and the results were dramatic. Non branded traffic increased, their website's conversion rate jumped from 1% to 3%, mainly because the users that we're bringing in from LLMs and from generative search experiences across Google and other search engines, those users are more informed. Since you're coming to the website a bit later in the marketing funnel than they would have otherwise in sort of the traditional SEO model, they have the downside of not coming to us sooner, but they have the upside of being a lot more informed whenever they come in. And that's because we can see our content being shown in AI generated responses in AI mode, in Perplexity, in LL and ChatGPT, and other search features that build some level of credibility and trust and honestly user sophistication when it comes to buying, so that when they come to the website, there's a higher chance that they're going to be a right fit lead for us just by virtue of all the research that they've done. And there's a higher chance that they'll fill out a form or click a phone number or whatever the key event on your website might be. For Analytics, say that's booking a meeting with a sales development representative. Um, this process happens through sort of a longer, more in depth research funnel. Um, One thing that I like doing is not hiding the tools that we use to do so. So you'll see me talk about some of the tools that we use. So that way, if you wanted to take this in house and do it of your own accord, you know the exact tools that an SEO agency like mine is using to do it. You'll also see some tools that you probably recognize, like Ahrefs that I have here on screen. There is not some secret tool, it's in some secret toolbox that you're missing. It is just a layer of expertise and sophistication on top of the results that platforms like these provide for us. So, to do content SEO well, you definitely need a research tool, that's for sure. Google hides more and more data from us every year. So we rely on platforms like Ahrefs to pull from multiple sources and collate that data in a way that we can easily understand. These tools help us understand what topics and keywords are popular, how competitive they are, and how people interpret them. It's not really about chasing keywords, it's really about capturing real demand. So it can be easy to get caught up on the keywords that a tool like Ahrefs might put out there in front of you, but seeing past that and understanding the demand that it's showing you through those keywords is probably the way to go. Keywords are more of a unit of understanding rather than a goal in and of themselves, is the way that I like to express it with clients. Our process starts with topic research. You'll see over on this left list, there's a lot of different types of research. We'll do a quick overview of each of those different types. Know that while I'm doing a quick overview of these things, I'll equip you with some more resources after this presentation. So if you wanted to dig into all of those independent tasks and details, you absolutely can. But starting with topic research, we identify opportunities that align with business goals and audience interests. And this is not about digging up keywords. This is mostly about what sectors of our industry actually appeal to the people that really buy from us. So, whether that's leveraging interviews with current customers at your firm, whether that is talking to leads that are currently in your funnel and are doing a level of vetting with you, whatever it is, we try to understand what topics and subtopics actually matter and which ones maybe we thought mattered but didn't actually matter after we talked to some people that are experiencing that buyer journey. The goal is to find the overlap between what clients care about and then where we can compete, not just with our expertise and ability to write about something, but more specifically with your brand truth, your reputation, your associations, and probably most importantly, your authority. There was a really good question that I heard in the last office hours, which was, what if we build our brand truth based on people in the firm and then those people leave? I would say the same concern or hesitation exists with SEO, where we try to build SEO based on a level of authority that people at the firm, not just the firm itself, have in the industry. People command a lot more qualifications than a brand ever will. And that's usually because it's easier for people to understand people than it is for people to understand companies. And so we leverage a lot of person to person authority in how we write content for websites and try to get them to rank in LLMs and AI generated search. And so you'll see that same sort of tendency in how we produce content and how we do research. After we figure out those topics, that's when we move into keyword research. So this is going to be a bit more tried and true and traditional and what you've either seen or maybe done some level of. This is about understanding how people phrase their searches. Again, it's not about like buying a unit within a search engine. It's all about building a level of understanding for us. So we can align our language and the way that we write with theirs. It's the difference between writing about sustainable building design versus green building firms. It's subtle, not critical, but definitely still matters. And as you get very, very educated and sophisticated buyers, which tends to be more the case in professional services industries and definitely the case in AEC, they will start to notice some of those minute differences in how we phrase and word things. And that can produce a lot of green flags or many, many red flags. After we do a level of keyword research, we integrate a step that we think gets missed a lot in SEO, which is analyzing intent. So there have been a lot of cases in traditional SEO programs that I've seen in the past, including those of clients that we've taken on where they did SEO before they came to us, which is optimized for a litany of keywords, but no one at the firm has actually looked at the other results that show up for a particular keyword, which definitely indicate the intent that a keyword has. That might be radically different from what you thought it was or what you're writing toward. If someone looking to learn or compare or hire, content should match whatever that intent is. And that's usually based on the other results that are showing up next to yours. Contrary to a lot of different industries and a lot of different situations, the black sheep are not liked in SEO. They're not picked. They are noticed and then promptly ignored. And that's because if your result is different from everybody else's, then that probably means you're doing something wrong, not something different. A blog post that educates is different from a case study that convinces, and that kind of intent research helps us build the right kind of content for each stage, each keyword, each step in the buyer journey. Then we look at competitors, like you should do in every marketing channel. What content is performing well? How is it structured? What's resonating with their users? This isn't about copying for sure, but it's about finding gaps that we can use to fill in our content or ways that we can differentiate from what's working well in order to capitalize on the differentiation and in order to be different in a good way as well as understand what's going to work well so that we can build some level of predictability in our investment, mostly in our content writing time. After that is when we develop that content. This is where expertise and authority really come through. AI systems reward clear and, like I mentioned earlier, authoritative writing. So fluff just doesn't cut it. We need to showcase our firm's actual expertise based not just on the firm and what the firm has done, but also based on our people, how long they've been in the industry, what kind of research and experimentation they've done, some of their personal highlights, wins, and losses, backed by those real projects and real insights that they've had out in the field. So similar to branding, you might find that an SEO will recommend, hey, we need people at your firm, especially your leaders or the people that are more outward facing, to be more active on places like social media. Contrary to the search engines of old, new search engines or updated search engines, as well as large language models, have no limitations on what they index. So they are looking at LinkedIn, they are looking at Facebook. For example, Google signed an actual contract deal with Reddit to use information from Reddit in their responses. So if they're willing to sign a contract with Reddit, they're definitely willing to at least scrape what people see on LinkedIn and Meta as a level of person to person qualification and credibility. And then lastly, measurement. Again, this is probably the most difficult part of doing any level of content SEO. But we do have to at least try to measure what's working, not just through rankings, but full funnel metrics. The point I really want to drive home here is that we're not just looking at clicks that come to the website, but we need to track how SEO is helping our funnel all the way down to a true conversion. So you might have an agency or an in-house marketer call a conversion when someone fills out a form, when someone clicks a phone number, whatever it may be for your website, your brand. Um, we rarely use a conversion to identify that. We usually call those key actions or key events. The word conversion is sacred, specifically whenever someone gives us money. And tracking whenever someone does that through the full funnel, whether that was from SEO or paid search or any other channel, is the name of the game. A lot of that doesn't happen all in places like Google Analytics. That usually happens in a CRM. And AEC is usually a bit stickier when it comes to adopting new technology. So if you're not using a CRM, I heavily recommend using one so that you can get these types of full funnel insights. And if you are using a CRM, that's fantastic. Make sure that you're actually noticing whenever LLMs give you traffic versus whenever Google search gives you traffic or any other source. There's definitely some nuance to that. Analytics and attribution is a whole different ballgame that we have to play in. So if you have any sort of detailed questions there, please let me know after the fact. But it's definitely pretty critical, just as critical as getting content right. I know I sort of glossed over these major steps just to give you an understanding of what all goes into it at a high level, but I don't want to leave you empty handed. So, I know it's overwhelming. We actually put together a full guide with step by step tasks on how to do the same exact research that we're doing with tools like SEMrush. It's a way to systematize the process and make it more manageable for teams with limited time. It's spelled out enough to where if you wanted to copy the task list that's in this document and throw it into your project management software or throw it into some email or your Apple Notes, whatever it is, you can absolutely do so. The link is right there. You'll have a copy of this presentation after the fact. So if you wanted to go view that, I think it's a 14-page guide. You are more than welcome to. Mostly because we're all about giving that stuff away for free. Our value doesn't come from some documentation like this. It comes from our expertise that we layer on top of it. So we don't want to gatekeep the steps that we use and the process that we use for our clients and our friends. Let's move on to the hooks, which is all about technical SEO. This is the behind the scenes work that is a bit more difficult to notice for users, but is definitely very apparent for search engines and for large language models when they scrape your website. This is all about making your website fast, secure, and easy for both humans and AI to navigate. Without strong hooks, even great fish won't stay on, right? So we do a lot of technical SEO for someone in your industry, an architecture firm called NSPJ Architects, which is local to us here in Kansas City. Um, Improving technical SEO made a huge difference for them. They went from generating 7 marketing qualified leads in a year to 7 every month, and that's only after 6 months of working with them. And we continue to see those numbers rise month over month, which is a 12-fold increase. So it shows how much the technical foundation really, really, really matters. Tools that we use in technical SEO, Screaming Frog has been the gold standard for a long, long time. It's a web crawler that allows us to look at an entire website in a more data driven way, very easily and quickly. It'll crawl every page of the site and surface a lot of technical issues that we know we need to care about as SEOs. It can also help from like a website development perspective. We use it all the time whenever we're developing new websites and need to understand how an old website was architectured, or some of the common issues or techniques that they've used. So instead of manually reviewing, thousands of lines of code, we can prioritize fixes that make the biggest impact by using a crawling software to get and then organize all of that data. Screaming Frog, just like Ahrefs or SEMrush, is a tool that's not terribly, terribly expensive, but it is sort of the gold standard that even if your SEO agency isn't telling you they use them, they probably are, which is totally fine. We just are being open about it. Technical SEO is definitely a bit more difficult and a lot more involved, using expertise from front end engineers and web developers all the way to content producers who understand what's on a website. We start with that auditing process, which is crawling the site and identifying problems with coding, structure, and performance. This gives us a clear roadmap of what needs fixing, what issues are more important than others, and then honestly, what issues get flagged but probably are not very important to fix right away. We move on then to looking at HTML markup, which we consider to be the most important thing. After fixing, I don't even know how many technical SEO issues across, I don't even know how many websites. Markup's usually the thing that has the biggest immediate effect. These are things like, are headings structured logically? Are we using an H1 heading and then an H2 rather than an H2 and then an H1? Are the right tags being used? Things like that. These details matter because they signal meaning to both search engines and AI systems, as well as users from a design perspective too. We then move on to metadata, which we consider to be a secondary but still high priority. Titles, descriptions, alt text, all of these tell machines what content is about. In a situation where a search engine or a large language model looks at a web page, they're obviously going to look at it very differently than a user will because, well, frankly, they don't have eyes. So they ingest all of the code, all of the content, they try to strip out the code, and then they just merge all the content together. And they lose a lot of the visual hierarchy that a human like you or I might have when looking at a web page. It's very akin to how assistive devices for people that are visually impaired look at content too, which is a great accessibility focused insight into how some of these machines work. So it's like labeling a filing cabinet in a lot of ways, where you don't have to go digging through all the individual folders first. You can go look at the label on a filing cabinet and say, okay, this is what this is about, or at least what it should be about, before we start ingesting heaps of content in sort of like one line of text. Then we move on to performance. Now, performance is critically important, but it's usually a lot more difficult to get right, which is why we put it third and not second or first. Load speed is critical, especially on mobile. Slow sites frustrate users and absolutely get penalized by search engines and large language models. Fixing this often requires some technical or development help, but it does have very fast paying dividends. After that, we move on to site architecture. Even though AI is getting better at understanding the relationships between pages without having to have like a super buttoned up URL naming convention or a super buttoned up subfolder organization system, they still need that just to give them some very clear guidance on how one page has a relationship with another page. This makes the site easier to crawl and obviously easier for users to navigate. And then finally is the user experience. Similar to how we measure results and how we measure intent and the research that we're doing in content SEO, this is kind of the unsung hero in technical SEO. So a lot of technical SEOs won't necessarily think about the user experience as part of off-page or technical SEO. We do, because we've seen it have real benefits and dividends, in our results. At the end of the day, SEO is not just for machines, it's for people equally, if not more so. And so if visitors can't find what they need or the design is clunky, they won't convert. UX is often the overlooked part, and SEO helps us close that loop. We'll move on to sort of our last leg here, which is the catch. This is how I like to describe local SEO. This is how we show up in places like maps and directories and location based searches. In professional services, credibility and trust are essential, and local SEO plays a big role in building that trust. Now, I'll be totally honest. Content SEO is definitely the most important leg of this journey for you. Technical SEO is right there behind it, but not very far behind it. Local SEO is one of those things where it is also intrinsically important, but it is far easier and cost effective, both in time and dollars, to do. So that's why I'll spend some time talking about the tool that we use to do local SEO. But know that local SEO, when it comes to our agency's time investment, is not that high. Mostly because a lot of it is fueled by making sure your information is accurate online. And then the most important thing, a lot of what you can do to boost your local SEO will be aided by doing good branding. And here's what I mean by that. So tools like Bright Local help us track our local visibility and reputation. They show us how a firm appears in near me localization searches where information is inconsistent and what people are saying in things like reviews or local listing sites. It's kind of like holding up a mirror to see your firm's online reputation. And so a lot of what you do to optimize local SEO is focused on, are your reviews good? That's probably more of a customer service accountable thing, but has some ties to SEO. So that's where an SEO should have the accountability of talking to your customer service team and talking to your operations team. It also affects how your website is shown in things like publications and local listings, which is more of like a PR thing. And in a lot of professional services industries, I mean, even AEC, as far as I've seen, that might be done by someone who's like a president or CEO or someone who's in a leadership position doing a lot of those conversations with sort of other websites out in the wild that might showcase your information. The reason I mentioned that it ties a lot back to branding is because as you build your brand truth, as you build positive associations, you'll start to see the way that you talk about your brand showing up in different parts of the local SEO gambit. Whether that is how AI engines talk about your brand in the same way that you do, with the same sort of tonality that only a human would really recognize, as well as how AI summarizes your brand in a list of others as buyers look for, hey, what are the best architecture, engineering, or construction firms near me, or in Kansas City, or St. Louis, or Chicago? The way that AI engines talk about you is reflective of how you talk about yourself. And so having a good brand strategy and making sure your content fuels that will show up in local SEO. So that's why local SEO tactics is not usually something that's like a list of best practices or a super long checklist. You do need to make sure that the local listings that you control, like your Google Business Profile or your Apple Maps listing, obviously make sure those are correct. Make sure your brand name is spelled correctly. Make sure your phone number is correct. Make sure your website is correct. All of those fun bits and pieces. But a lot of those are going to come from the work that you do in brand strategy and content production. Alrighty. That's all we'll talk about on local SEO. Let's do sort of a quick recap of what we talked about before we get into sort of a Q&A session, and I'll wrap up here. The lake has definitely changed, right? The lake that we are fishing in has been drastically affected by waves that affect not just us as marketers, but also the people that we're marketing to. Firms have tighter resources, and buyers are using radically different tools, not just to find us, but also vet us in determining whether or not they want to buy from us. And those waves are strong, right? AI has transformed search and created vastly new challenges for SEOs like me, as well as just general marketers. But with the right lures, hooks, and mechanisms to catch those fish, content, technical, and local SEO, respectively, we can adapt and thrive. Like I mentioned, it's not like AI came in and completely changed all the best practices that we had for SEO. It just added some more and added some nuance for sure. So SEO is not dead. As you might see in LinkedIn, it's evolving. And as you encounter AEC leadership and stakeholders wanting to get a bit more rigid with how they're investing their marketing dollars and your marketing team's time in a way that's a bit more ROI focused and even in ways that are a bit more short term focused, you'll still be able to leverage SEO to meet those demands. In fact, I would argue that even compared to traditional media or even some of the things that I praise, like brand strategy, as well as authority building, SEO is right up there, if not further, when it comes to taking an ROI based approach towards building business outcomes, right? Whereas a lot of leaders and stakeholders might on face see a website or a new visual identity as a creative output rather than a business outcome. And that's often an uphill battle that we as marketers have to face with our bosses and selling those ideas upwards. SEO is a lot more tied to the bottom line because there is more data despite how much Google black boxes that information. There is a clear tie to how people see us, how they click through to a website, how they become a lead, how they matriculate through a CRM if you're using one. And so SEO is a lot more tied to that sort of napkin math return on investment calculation, which can make it a really nice crutch to add to your marketing strategy. So if you need something that's very ROI driven, SEO can pull that weight as long as you pair it with some of those more creative driven aspects like visual identity, like websites, like those sorts of things. It can pull a lot of weight there when it comes to some of the penny pinching or budget consciousness you might get from leadership. I also want to leave you with a great resource that we wrote. So, in addition to that content research guide, we've spent a lot of time developing our unique POV. If you're on LinkedIn and you're remotely in the SEO algorithm when it comes to LinkedIn or other social media platforms, you'll have noticed a lot of noise about AI and SEO. We think our approach is pretty grounded in research and experimentation. Some of the case studies that I mentioned earlier, Analytics 8 and SPJ, it's not like we came in and knew exactly what to do. They came to us as clients in and during the rise of generative search. While it's still evolving, it was rapidly evolving whenever these brands joined our client roster. And so there were plenty of failures that we learned from. So we're not just talking about it, we're testing, we're failing, we're refining so that we can share what actually works. We've put together a full document with our perspective and our POV, which you can absolutely click on and read at your discretion. But with that, I think we can move on to the Q&A session if anybody has any questions. I'll leave this up here on the screen for just a sec. That QR code will take you to a viewable version of this presentation. So if you wanted to go through, view some slides for later, click on some of those links to like that content research guide or to our POV on AI integrated SEO, you are more than welcome to. And my contact information is there if you wanted to reach out with questions or asks or anything like that. So, Jerry, I appreciate you having me. Like I said, happy to dig into any questions people might have.
Yeah, let's do it. And while we're opening it up for questions, one thing that popped up in the chat was just a request to maybe drop a link to those documents in the chat if you have them
Yeah.
handy. And if not for
Yeah.
everyone, we always send a recap email. So if you look for that email, we'll have links to all of these materials plus the recording from today's session in that email. So with that, any questions? You can put them in the chat or uh, raise your hand or just call out.
Yeah, I've got one. I thought it was really helpful at the end how you started talking about the tie to all of this with ROI, and I'm wondering if you're a marketer and you are tasked with speaking to some leaders about investing more and exploring more in this space, what are some tips that you can offer for starting this conversation in a way with folks who might be very overwhelmed or out of their depth, but ultimately are some key decision makers in moving these sorts of tips forward?
That's a fantastic question. So it kind of depends on who you're talking to. Most of my job, specifically in my role as vice president of strategy at Voltage, is talking to a combination of CEOs, COOs, and CFOs whenever they first learn of Voltage and want to discuss what a potential engagement looks like after we sort of have an introductory meeting with like a marketing director or VP of marketing. And a lot of it is based on what I would call revenue consulting. And the big question that I usually start with is, hey, CEO, let's pull you off to the side here and just ask the basic question, how much do you want to grow the business this year or next year? Um, that's usually the most subjective question you'll ever get out of a business, and one that is a priori or prerequisite to any other question within the business is how much do you want to grow? That really defines how aggressive or conservative your strategy should be. So you might get a number like 15%, which for some brands is pretty conservative. You might get a number like 25, which like for a marketing agency for our business is pretty normal. You might get one that's like 50, which is crazy aggressive, right? But could be the reality through a smaller firm. How SEO ties into that question is understanding, hey, if we want to grow the business by 20%, how much weight does SEO need to pull, right? If you're operating a channel like SEO, which has a lot more data tied to it when it comes to attribution, you might have the ability to say, like, hey, on average, we get this many clicks coming to our website in a given month or a year. X% of those turn into leads just based on what we see in Google Analytics. X% of those leads actually turn into real opportunities for us. And then our sales team closes X% of those opportunities into real customers times the average value of a customer in our firm. It's a pretty easy napkin math to say, hey, SEO usually pulls this amount of revenue for us and takes this chunk of how much you want to grow the business this year. Now, depending on what else you're doing, right? If SEO covers 100% of that, great, you're done. Let's write the plan and then sign dotted line. And CEO says yes and gives a rubber stamp. If SEO is pulling a percentage of that, do you have other channels or other tools in your toolbox that you're using to backfill those percentages? And if SEO is doing quite well in your marketing program and is able to help you build that book of business, maybe it can consume some other costs and expenditures in your marketing plan. So, like, there have been times where just because of the way a client's business is structured and what we know we can do for them in SEO, we might say, hey, SEO can, it can win 110% of your goal. And there's that extra 10% that we can play around with. So let's add in some expenses that you've been meaning to do, knowing that those expenses may not produce any return, but SEO can sort of carry its water. That would be things like investing in a better visual identity. That might be things like investing in a new website. So there are a lot of ways that we can sort of play the game, but a lot of it comes down to understanding of what budget or P&L your leadership is using to make their decisions. So a lot of it is speaking upwards. And so that's why a lot of marketing agencies and marketing teams don't really care to look at those documents. I think they have incentive to do so because as CEOs and especially CFOs, for good reason, are getting a lot more budget conscious in this industry and in this day and age. Speaking their language is really, really, really helpful. And SEO, like I mentioned, as a traffic source, is very, very close to how those numbers play out in like a CRM. So that napkin math is not very hard to do. And I call it napkin math because you can do it on a napkin.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hey, Nivin, we got a question in the chat. In the AEC
Mhm.
space, do you find content should be more storytelling or technical details approach
Mhm.
from both a conversion perspective and an SEO perspective?
Yeah. I'll give the difficult answer, which is both. So I think that it kind of depends on where a user is at in their marketing and buying journey. I would argue from what I've seen in AEC with my clients, NSPJ is a really good example of this, is that when users are at the very top of the funnel, they usually care for some of the more storytelling types of content. So that's where making sure that your portfolio pages and product pages do have that visual eye candy, but still load really, really, really quickly, which is where we get some of the technical SEO expertise in there, is really, really important at the top of the funnel. And then as they get further and further into their procurement and buying journey, they are looking for some of the more subject matter expertise focused bits of information. So, for example, NSPJ is heavily into high net worth individual residential architecture as well as landscape architecture. And as we find RFPs and leads and opportunities in their pipeline, we see where they view pages really, really early on in their buying cycle that were focused more on like eye candy and storytelling. But as they get closer and closer to actually giving us an RFP or actually booking an intro call with a sales development or business development representative, they are now looking at pages that are a lot more technical in nature, ones that describe how their service works, some of these certifications that they have in the industry to prove that they're credible and safe, things like that. So, unfortunately, the answer is both, but for good reason.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Other questions? Anyone else have a question for Niven? This has been a fantastic presentation. Thank you.
I actually have a question if no one else raised their hand, Jerry.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, that it's good talking to you. This is Alex from Toky. I apologize. I not on camera here with everybody. Poor planning on my part, so I have to be a little bit more of a passenger on this call. But found the topic absolutely fascinating. Actually answered a ton of questions that I've had on my own about why I'm seeing information the way I am. Also doesn't ever cease to amaze me just the alignment and process that your team seems to have with ours and how we approach branding. Kind of curious, typically Toki will get.
Hey, Alec, I think you dropped
Uh,
out.
yeah.
Well,
Uh oh.
yeah, hopefully he'll,
I apologize.
oh, there.
I apologize. I was literally driving through a tunnel. I mean, you can't time me. My question, Evan, is like typically Toki gets tapped on the shoulder, like you might imagine, for when people are thinking about a redesign of a website.
Hmm.
I'm kind of curious what your world looks like in that regard. Like, when typically do firms tend to reach out to you? Do you have an opinion as like the perfect time when folks should be considering this type of stuff? And then just to kind of pair with that, I'm curious what's an ongoing engagement look like? Is this something people need to be like consistently thinking about? Is it a monthly process? Is it maybe every 6 months? I'm just fascinated to kind of understand how you guys operate up at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Happy to give the 1 minute masterclass on Voltage's operating model. There are some similarities and definitely some differences from how other SEO agencies work. Um, first, a preface and bit of context. Voltage is definitely an SEO agency, but we also do a couple of other things. We have in-house experts on paid search as well, and we also have in-house web designers and web developers. The websites that we create and the paid search programs that we run are more to add to our SEO campaigns and not meant to be sort of like standalone services, mostly because, we talked about some instances in which technical SEO requires some development expertise. That's why we have in-house developers. We didn't get as much into what happens if your rankings are far lower down on page one of Google. We use paid search to supplement that digital real estate and fill those gaps until we're able to increase particular pages ranking on page one to the point where we don't need to pay for that listing anymore. And so I give that preface and that context because you'll notice that my answer to your question about our operating model will include some other functions that maybe a tried and true traditional SEO agency doesn't have. So when should people be considering SEO? The answer is always. If you dig back into some of the old blog posts and old case studies and old research studies on SEO in the old traditional days, you'll probably see the adage that if you're, it's like you need SEO before you think you need it, right? So people should always be thinking about it, especially if you have a website that takes in a lot of traffic. If I were to give you a technical answer, I would probably say if your website is important to how you make money, then you should be thinking about SEO. It is especially true if you're rebuilding your website. There's a lot of SEO work that can and should happen during a website development project or website design project, not just after it's launched, but while you're creating it. And then after you launch that website, or even if you already have one, SEO is kind of one of those ever present things in a marketing strategy for a lot of our clients, those being like sort of mid market professional services businesses, including AEC. Um, Most agencies will think about SEO on a month to month basis. That's probably not because that's like the best way to do SEO, but mostly because of how the agency models influenced how firms think about SEO, which is totally fine. Um, so in that sense, an SEO agency is doing some level of content production every single month. When we think about trading outputs in an agency to client relationship, they might say like, "Hey, we're going to write X amount of content per month. There also should be some level of recurring auditing and monitoring, mostly for technical SEO, because as websites grow and evolve with the brand, which they should, we have some level of monitoring to catch natural technical SEO issues that crop up over time. That's not a bad thing. That's not anyone's fault. That just happens, but we have to know that it happens and we have to fix it over time. And so you find little pockets of content and technical SEO that are important to us on a recurring basis. And that's usually what's written into an SEO contract with an SEO agency if you're doing something more long term. The way that we think about that long term campaign is whenever we take on a new client for SEO, we start with SEO strategy or SEO foundation, which is first a level of auditing for technical SEO issues. Do that first because sometimes we find things that are like critically urgent that we need to go fix right now. Then we do our research for content SEO. Then we usually rebuild people's analytics systems. So, in addition to being SEO experts that also does paid search and website design development, we're also heavy into analytics and attribution. In fact, that's my part of Voltage's nerdery more than anything else. So, we usually rebuild the analytics and attribution system and then present a plan that usually lasts us for 1 year. So we build 1 year roadmaps, and it says, here's the content we're going to write about in month 2 and month 3 and month 4, whatever it is. Here are the keywords we want that to rank for by the end of this year. Here's how much traffic we think that's going to produce for you, coming from organic listings, coming from LLMs, coming from paid listings, whatever it might be. And then based on your historical data in your CRM, here's how much business we think that's going to provide you. And as we go through month by month, we're going to look at what our projections said in the roadmap and then how much business we actually got from our results and see if we're off base, if we're ahead of pace, and make changes to the roadmap as we go. So that's kind of what a long-term SEO campaign looks like with Voltage. That's obviously not what it might look like for another SEO agency, but ours is very much focused on that introductory level revenue consulting that I talked about a bit earlier and a couple questions ago, and then how our roadmap aligns with that consulting throughout that 1 year term using our SEO expertise tactics.
Awesome. Well, we're definitely a little past time, but I'm going to keep this going as long as there are questions and Niven has time. But I understand if folks need to drop off. So, any other questions that you want to shout out or put in the chat? All right. Well, I think that is it for today. Niven, thank you as always. And we'll definitely have you back. I actually do have one question for those who are still on. If there's any particular topic that you'd love to hear more about from Niven in the future. If there is, drop it in the chat or send us an email. All right. Niven, thank you so much. So I think that's going to wrap it up for today for TOKY Office Hours. We'll definitely be back again next month, third Thursday of the month. And in between then, you can catch up with TOKY on our new podcast, which you can find at theintangible.brand.com. We hope you will follow us there. Thank you all.